Hello there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you may be listening to this second installment of the hashtag Business of AFCON, an exclusive series partnered with the Football Foundation for Africa, the Africa Business of Sport podcast, bringing the best insights when it comes to everything that has to do with the business and commercial aspects of the Africa Cup of Nations. Welcome to this second episode where we're really going to be trying to have a conclusive conversation, if we can even reach a conclusion when it comes to the TV and media rights saga that has folded out across the past few weeks. We are happy once again to have a full squad of the three co-hosts, which are going to be with you across this entire series. Founder and CEO of the Football Foundation for Africa, Brian Wesala. Brian, nice to see you again.
Thank you very much, Jabuko. Always good to see you.
And my co-host on the Africa Business of Sport podcast, Adam Spio. Adam, how are you doing?
Hey, blessed and highly favored brother. All is well here. I'm looking forward to this session.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we might just jump straight into it. We, over the past couple of weeks, I think from December when it was announced that New World TV and the Confederation of African Football had concluded a historic media rights agreement, which essentially granted exclusive rights to most of CAF competitions, but crucially including the AFCON 2023 for New World TV. And what this did, and I'd love to get your assessments of this, is it essentially challenged the dominance that SuperSport has held in sub-Saharan Africa when it comes to the TV rights in football. We've seen a monopoly being challenged by a new upstart coming from Togo, which was only started in 2015. So New World TV, Brian, as a new actor when it comes to media rights and the TV rights sector within Africa, particularly within African football, what would your assessment be by this grand entrance that they have and the ambition that they seem to show?
I think this is good for African football to see more players, not just on the pitch but now off the pitch, trying to push the business of sport forward. And as going by the CAF announcement, the investment that New World TV put in will really go a long way in generating more funds for development of football, for the growth of the game. So I think we really need to take these positively and understand what this means for the future of the game. And of course, there's a lot of other developments that are happening in the media space. What does this mean beyond CAF competitions to our local leagues? How will this really impact the whole media landscape? So a positive move, a positive development in the industry, but still a lot to be unpacked, understood, so that we see the long-term value of having more players in the media space.
Adam, we've had several conversations offline and on the Africa Business of Sport podcast regarding the importance and what this signals for the media rights sector within African football. And one part where I think I've shown how fascinated I am by this particular aspect of the story is the CAF announcement, once again, just alluding to what Brian has said. And to quote Dr. Patrice Motsepe, the media rights agreement with New World TV is the biggest investment by a Pan-African broadcaster in CAF's history. It's reported that the total is around $80 million over the 2-year period. From a commercial point of view and the business of broadcasting here, what does this mean for CAF and New World TV as well?
The good thing is that money is definitely coming in, and the more money, the better. We can now see that the prize money for the African Cup of Nations has gone up. We've seen that new partners have come on board as well. So, of course, the more the money, the better for us. The other side that I want to look at and focus on is that it will bring a lot of positive competition in the industry, because people will be thinking, if New World TV, a new entity that doesn't have the pedigree as compared to the brands like Kano Plus, SuperSport being on the continent, people will start to invest more into starting initiatives like this and trying to be top notch while competing for the biggest prize. We know that the $80 million that was paid was for the period of 2023 to 2025 for all the cup competitions. Perhaps what stops us from seeing after the 2025 a new player coming to the industry and saying, you know what, we have 150 million. We may not be in every other country in Africa, but we're in 1 or 2 countries. We have 150 million. We want to pay for your rights for all your competitions, and that invest that into the African countries that are coming through. The more competition is just better, because we wouldn't see situations where only one person tends to flex their wings. Although we have to also consider that here on the continent, apart from the African competitions that we enjoy every 2 years or so, the most watched competitions tend to be the European one. So how can you stay sustainable and relevant over the course of the year, where you know that if after this competition ends, you still will not be able to compete? So this will drive other brands to find ways to also invest into other aspects of sports rights properties, to really stay sustainable. But I mean, long term, I can foresee maybe 15 to 20 top players on the continent battling it out for some of the biggest competitions from CAF and globally as well.
Brian, from a narrative point of view, we've had a conversation around this. Just the entrance that New World TV has had coming into the media rights space. I didn't know of New World TV before they got the rights to broadcast the FIFA World Cup in Qatar in 2022. So being incorporated in 2015 and in less than 10 years coming and challenging the monopoly that SuperSport has held for a very, very long time. The narrative that this has and the way they are trying to democratize football and the broadcasting, because we see that they're working with several free-to-air companies all across the African continent. I know SABC here in South Africa recently got into an agreement to get a sub-licensing license of all the rights that New World TV actually has right now. So what does this mean for the increased audience that this brings potentially? Because this is not always going to be a pay TV, but also free to air is very important to their strategy, it seems.
Um, I mean, whether this will lead to an increased audience is still debatable. Knowing that they outbid a major player on the continent, MultiChoice, for this deal, who have I think a subscription of 23 million across the continent, compared to what New World TV have of about 100,000, and also being based in Francophone Africa. It's still yet to be seen if it will lead to increased viewership. Even though they have the FTA, the free to air package that they are distributing, this is normally to national television broadcasters. Here in Kenya, it's KBC. In South Africa, you rightly mentioned it's SABC. How many of these countries have bought the rights from Newell TV will be interesting to see. We also know that at some point, SuperSport announced that they will not be showing AFCON, and you could see the reaction from the population. A lot of people were not sure whether they will be able to watch the competition because what has happened over time, and in this case, we call this monopolizing of the media rights by SuperSport, especially in Anglophone Africa, is that people have bought into the whole value chain. In this case, the decoders and everything. So they're basically tied to SuperSport, and everybody is expecting to watch, or most people are expecting to watch the matches through SuperSport. So it will be interesting to see after the reports that will come out of AFCON, to see whether there's increased viewership. Of course, there's increased financing, but viewership will be different. Now with SuperSport still in, probably this will grow, and this is a welcome move for Africa. Yeah.
Adam, from a commercial perspective, once again, we look at the length of most of the sponsorship agreements and now this media rights agreements, where CAF seems to be only concluding short-term deals. So as you rightly mentioned, this media rights agreement is from 2023 until 2025, as is many of the sponsorships that are currently ongoing. So in terms of a long-term TV rights strategy, could we see SuperSport coming back into the fray after the AFCON in 2025 in Morocco? Could we see SuperSport really coming in and gaining that lost market share once again? That's if they even lose any, given that they are now showing the AFCON. And I would predict that they will try to get sub-licensing deals for most of the subsequent competitions.
We have to consider that early on or mid parts into the year in 2023, CAF almost destroyed the relationship that they had with being concerning broadcasting agreements. And we know from time to time that CAF tends to have problems with following through with the original years that competitions are supposed to be played. It says AFCON 2023, but it's being played in 2024. The previous one said AFCON 2021, but it was played in 2022. And for broadcasting companies, they project ahead. They know that if this competition is coming, we're going to invest X amount of dollars into it, and investing that amount of dollars, they will now have time to bring on brands and sponsors to come and cover activations for those ones. CAF has to get to a point where planning becomes almost perfect, where if we say that a competition is going to this country in this particular year, they follow suit with it. When we start to see a bit more consistency in hosting as per planned, the big boys wouldn't mind investing ahead into the rights. I'm very sure one of the reasons why SuperSport weren't necessarily initially bothered with getting the rights is because of the saga that they saw that CAF was going through with Bean. Many years ago, CAF also went through that same saga with Lacadier when they cancelled their the partnership that they had with them. So in order for the big boys like SuperSports and Canal Plus to genuinely say we want to get rights weeks or months in advance, CAF has to do its homework and make sure that if we say Morocco 2025, the competition is not played in 2026. If not, people wouldn't be willing to, align, because monies will be spent here and there, and all those monies will, go down the drain if it's not allocated for the timing that it was planned. Imagine we hear that the 2026 FIFA World Cup in the US cannot be done there and it has to be pushed to 2027. Do you know how many brands are going to lose out from that? too much for us to count. So for Super Sports to feel confident that I'm going to invest my money into initiatives where I have to get right early on, whether it's the AFCON, the women's AFCON, or the under 23s and the under 20s and whatnot, CAF has to make sure that if we say we're running this competition now or at this point, it happens at that point and doesn't happen later. Because logistically, you are going to affect the commercial power and the ability to allocate resources quickly as compared to when you've already planned it ahead of time.
Fascinating. Now, I hope that was a decent introduction into this issue because we've only covered half of it. We are still now going to put the spotlight on SuperSport and what this means for them. And we're not doing that alone. We're going to be joined by an expert, one of the best in his field when it comes to media rights and TV rights in football within Africa. Before I do introduce our very special guest, I'd just like to remind you that this episode was made possible by longtime FFA partners, Parmas and Ambi Group. Now, our special guest, I'm so excited to see this individual once again. We've had him on the Africa Football Business Show. We've had him on the Africa Business of Sport podcast, one of the best people in the industry to speak to when it comes to media rights and TV in Africa. It's a great pleasure to have world-renowned sports management consultant and adjunct faculty at Northern Western University in Qatar and New York University, Dr. Gerard Akindes. Gerard, great to see you. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. Thank you for a very kind and very flattering introduction of my expertise. I'm a learner of this field and it's a field in constant movement. I'm still a learner. Thank you.
I love that perspective. So let's jump straight into it. We have just did an introduction on what New World TV poses in this new world when it comes to the TV rights broadcasting in football in Africa. Let's look at SuperSport now, because I think not only has their dominance being challenged, but just how they come across as a brand, and the U-turns that were happening very late on, whether they were hot or cold with the AFCON rights. Can you just give us an assessment of what SuperSport's role has been in the saga and what New World TV's new media rights agreement with CAF means long-term for SuperSport?
I don't know if they have a role. I think they were outbidded for this. It's a change for them because they used to have this competition consistently, regardless who had the rights. Because before the new management of CAF, the rights were managed by Lagardère in France, and they used to have the right. And for them, it's losing the rights is basically what it is. And I looked at a post by the CAF. I don't know what's his role, Luxor. Yes, and
Yes.
SuperSport is still on the list of the broadcasters. I was surprised. SuperSport is on the list. Canal Plus is still on the list. Is on the list, then Canal Plus is broadcasting it. I don't know if SuperSport is broadcasting the competitions or if they have a few games. What means that the overall broadcasting agreement now seems to be a revolution. It's not a full revolution. It looks more like an arrangement. I don't know if they are broadcasting as a sub-licensee or if they managed to get an agreement between them, New World TV, and CAF. I'm not sure what the agreement is. And that's one aspect. The other thing, this is not really new, that a business, sometimes even not a media business, but most of the time is a media business or television business, is going to capture the overall right of the African Cup of Nations. It used to be LC2. They used to buy the right from Lagardère or Sport 5 at that time, and then resell them, sublease the right, sub-license the right to national televisions. It is a kind of old model with an updated business, which is also a major, or trying to establish itself as a major transnational pay TV broadcaster, New World TV. But for SuperSport, it's just they're going to adapt, they're going to adjust. And the way it works generally in this bid, it's you put in your bid based on what you think the value of the event is, and you stay there. If you are outbidden, so be it, you lose it. And sometimes, because they used to bid, they're not going to put too much money in it. What explain how New World TV could get the bid and could win the bid. Because for New World TV coming in at a new entrant, they have to make sure that their value is high enough to outbid those who have been bidding for some time. That's the way. And the same thing happened when Biscay B got the right of EPL we see today. They did the same thing, and sometimes they bid a lot of money. And then the challenge for them will be to recover that investment, but it's a long-term investment.
Dr. Akindes, you mentioned Canal Plus. I feel there's some interesting movements going on behind the scenes. Especially now, we know the Canal Plus group actually owns up to 32% of MultiChoice. And also looking at the language dynamic here, Canal Plus was always focused on Francophone, SuperSport was an Anglophone, and then we have Bein Sport serving the Arab countries when it comes to these sports media rights. So, what does the entry of New World Media, supposedly Francophone, apart from the name, mean for this industry? And we know that. Even Canal Plus actually is facing a lot of competition in European sector from the streaming, and that's why they want to focus on Africa. So they come here now, they meet New World Media. What does this really mean for the industry and the dynamics between business and also the geopolitics of it, especially looking at language? Yeah.
It's a very interesting question. Canal Plus, the president of CU, at least for Africa, was on the French radio, RFI, and he was explaining that they have the African Cup of Nations. His language was very interesting. For him, they are well established. What is true? They have been on the continent since the 90s, early 90s. They have been Francophone Africa since the early 90s, and their market have been growing. I'm not talking about market share, but at least in Francophone Africa, they are dominant. And if we look at just the sport side, it may look like a challenge. And so the World Cup, they didn't win the bid, but they managed to work with, that was a very interesting situation. You know, there's some linguistic lines in African sport broadcasting that used to exist. The Arab speaking countries are controlled completely by Bein Sport for sport, not the other aspect. Arab, North Africa, Mauritania, Sudan, Somalia, Comoros, and I don't know who else. But they control by Bein, and Bein rights are exclusive. No one else competes in their space. It's totally exclusive. But when we move out of the Arab-speaking world, the rights are never exclusive. They are never exclusive. Even the World Cup rights are not exclusive. You see always a few players getting the right to broadcast almost on the same market, or the cross lines. Canal Plus, we stick to the Francophone, the French-speaking Africa. SuperSport, we stick to the English-speaking Africa. And it used to be like that. And Canal Plus is not trying to get into the English-speaking market. And SuperSport is not getting to, yes. But now with the Canal Plus got at least 37% of a shareholder, 37% of SuperSport. What's creating a bigger machine to outbid, to fight on the continent if you're a new entrant. And it's a major additional challenge for New World Sports. The power of these two companies who have been around the same time since the 90s became bigger because they control 60%, I think, of the market share of pay TV on the continent. And Canal Plus it's more than just sports. And they see, Adam was talking about the properties, European football properties. They still have those one, and they still have many other properties, and they have a strong presence in terms of cultural content. They still have that strong presence. And what they did under the pressure of Star Times, the Chinese who came in and were all over the linguistic lines in English and French speaking, they have with direct TV, terrestrial TV, they develop A plus. They develop A plus, A plus, A plus Abidjan, which are directly targeting African market or specific market with a very localized content and and proximity, and that is giving them definitively a competitive edge. Whoever wants to come in has to be able to bring in not just sport, but much more than sport. And I don't see New World Sport competing anytime soon with getting their subscribers. Maybe they are going to expand because they are cheaper. They are going to expand to market that are having customers that haven't subscribed to Canal Plus. But right now, the balance is not there yet, and what they call the barrier to entry is high. It is very high, and TV is a very, very expensive business.
I mean, Dr. Gerard, you mentioned that the barrier to entry is very high. And from a sports business lens, when I look at how to innovate the industry so that we have much less thick barriers and more people providing the service, what comes to mind is that maybe in, let's say, in the next 5 years we scrap off the whole bidding aspects when it comes to TV rights. Because I ask myself, let's take the Premier League for example, right? We know that for the next phase of TV rights, Sky, Talk Sports, and BBC will have access in one capacity or another, and brands like Amazon Prime losing out. Meanwhile, they tend to have an audience watching through. Why should we have to come and bid so much amounts of money, right? And then get other people to lose when they have an audience, when we can have a system where all the leagues and the competition holders, they price different packages for their content. So off the top of my head, if you say for 380 games of a Premier League season, you're going to have to pay like, let's say, 200 million pounds, right? And then maybe for 100 game, you're going to pay like 120 million pounds. For 80 games, you're going to pay 50 million pounds. Having those different bundles available for brands, what you see is that brands will come through and, as per their purchasing power, would go in there and pick the bundles that work for them. So now, instead of you having just 3 or 4 people paying so much money and giving access to the world with your product, you can have much more brands coming in. People will pay different, bundles as per their purchasing power and as per their audience as well. And it just makes it a very open industry, because we can't be using old tricks if we're moving in, especially when we're seeing that OTT platforms are becoming increasingly accessible for the younger demographic, especially here in Africa, and also the fact that mobile is directly changing how we view sports. Nowadays, it's really hard for a lot of us to sit down and watch a match for 90 minutes, as compared to watching a short preview or a highlight and taking the results, right? So being open, allowing many brands to come in and purchase the different bundles is a bit more acceptable. If they had used that approach, for instance, we wouldn't have seen the broadcasting saga that we saw with the Women's World Cup last year. Because now, if I'm a DS, a multi-choice or a Kano Plus, if I know that I only have money to buy a few games, I'll go buy and work on my activation. I think that's a more inclusive approach and much more developmental approach when it comes to broadcasting rights.
Yes, you are right. You are right. That's a good point, and with some futuristic thinking. Unfortunately, for what I know, when you are going for a bid, I remember talking to ESPN guy a while ago, ESPN, the American sport business. He told me, we go for a bid, we don't leave anything on the table. We buy everything. We buy TV, we buy streaming, we buy everything because we don't want anybody to come and get one of those distribution channels and compete with us. What you go for, if you have the means, when you go for sports, you bid for monopoly, exclusivity. And Africa, at least my reading is so far, except Bean Sport, which has exclusivity, and Bean Sport bid for a broader market. It's not just English, Arabic speaking in Africa. They bid for the Middle East and other markets. What gives them also an edge, and is the same edge Canal Plus has. They can bid beyond the African market. What makes their offer much more appealing to rights owners? We are going to broadcast to this big audience. When you stick to Africa, your audience is smaller. That's what gives an edge to some of them. And what you want is to bid for exclusivity. But the way I'm reading it, Africa sport properties may not have that appeal to have a high bid for exclusivity. That's why we end up with so many, not many, but a few who are going to bid to share the space. And since they already have their guaranteed subscribers, Canal Plus and SuperSport, basically they just get the right to serve their subscribers. They don't get the right to kind of try to control the market. They get the right to serve their subscribers. That's my reading of it. But what you are saying, it has a lot of value if the right owners, which is CAF and whoever work on African sport, think differently. We have to think differently, think less about maximizing the right through one broadcaster or one company, and think differently. We have to find a balance between generating revenue and keeping our properties valuable for a broader audience.
No, that's a great point there, Dr. Gerard. If we maybe do some more futuristic thinking, you might have heard that Showmax 2.0 is relaunching across many African markets. And that was the big announcement that MultiChoice Group made. And the most innovative feature of this new offering is that for the first time ever, there is going to be a mobile only plan for the Premier League. So fans across Africa, if you subscribe to Showmax, for example, you are able to get a mobile plan for the Premier League for as little as just under $5, 69 Rand here in South Africa. That's very, very cheap. So looking at the future of how the format and structure of the TV rights are going to be for CAF, bearing in mind that this agreement with New World TV ends in 2025, what innovations might come through in the years to come? Might we see more matches being broadcasted with digital partners like YouTube and TikTok, for example? Can we see Showmax potentially having an impact on the broader industry and really bringing in video streaming for sport in Africa?
I didn't know about Showmax. I know they developed that, and then now they are pushing it.
Yeah.
What is a smart strategy for them? And the way I can look at it quickly, it is they are trying to go after a market where consumers are not willing to watch too many games and don't want to spend too much money. That is a younger market that doesn't have the means to subscribe to DSTV. Basically, that's what they are trying to achieve, which is great. But when we talk about internet on the continent, we also have to keep in mind that the infrastructure of internet is getting better, is growing in terms of subscribers or access to data, but it's still relatively expensive to have to use data on the continent. Then when you buy a sport viewing streaming subscription for $5, you may pay the same amount for your data. What makes it still costly? And OTT has a future in Africa, definitively yes, but it has to go along the development and the affordability of data and internet access on the continent, which is a little bit beyond sport world. And my thinking is, I think I wrote it a few times or sometimes, it is companies like MTN and Orange, who have been in sport for so long, why are they not taking more risk by making data more affordable and partnering with sport or other industries to develop the network of data, of internet and access to data to allow the dissemination of all this content? Because they sit on the side, they sponsor a lot. They are probably among the top sponsors and now with the betting companies of sports at a certain scale on the continent. But they have the internet distribution capacity and infrastructure. They are the one who have it. We don't have the cable one. We have the internet one, the phone one, or the telecom one. Why not looking at a longer plan to make this more affordable, accessible, and in partnership with those who have content to distribute? And then they can sponsor or partner. I think there's a lot of things we can do, but we have to think outside the traditional broadcasting rights and all the system that are working and work very well, even if they're challenged today in the Western world, in the established sport industries like the US or Europe. We have to think differently, but we have to think more in partnership than I want to just do my business and collect my money. Yeah, even for CAF, maybe less money right now and more in partnership with telecom companies and have internet cheaper, do something that is out of the traditional routes. We have to think that way.
You muted, Brian.
Sorry for that. I said I agree with you, Dr. Akindes, and just to pick up on some of the work that you have done, you mentioned also the quality of the product, especially when going into this partnership arrangement. I think that is something we have to be more innovative about. I think one of the challenges that we have witnessed, even in the current AFCON, is attendance at matches. You know, even for the opening ceremony, we were not able to fill the stadium. And this makes our competitions, our tournaments, our event less attractive to sponsors or and by extension to our other partners or broadcast partners. What needs to be done, especially now that we're in a situation? You mentioned Showmax will be airing Premier League. That is more capital flowing out of the continent without really us having capital to improve on our product. What can we do in order to change these dynamics when it comes to capital content flow in the industry?
Brian, I wish I could give you a good answer. I'll be the savior of African football. It's very complicated. When I say it's complicated, it's not impossible. And our challenges, and for me, one of the biggest challenge we have is to think in partnership with others. Sports cannot do this by itself. It requires government. It requires many other partners. When I talk about the product, I'm talking more about how we manage ourselves at the sport level. Are we serious about what we do? Are we consistent? Do we keep improving? Not that we have to be the greatest or the most beautiful overnight, but we have to keep improving. One of the biggest challenges our sport have, and it materialize in stadium empty. I'll talk about the African Cup of Nations after. It is our football, at least, is losing roots in our communities. What we play every weekend is losing its roots. This can be controversial. Football academies are not helping African football on a daily basis anymore. They used to, but they are mostly becoming export machines. They help the AFCON, but they don't have the local footballs. And local football not doing well, we are not going to get partners, we are not going to get much. And local football has to become, it's almost like an emergency. Otherwise, we'll be left with just the AFCON as what makes African football. Academies to export and then re-import them to play the AFCON. That's what we'll be left with. Our clubs are losing roots, even the most traditional clubs. Adam is here, he will talk about Ghana. They don't fill up the stadium. They don't fill up 10,000 seat stadium. ASEC in Cote d'Ivoire. We have a big challenge, and that will require a lot of thinking and a lot of work, but not just for the club. It requires we want to praise ourselves for being communal. We need to come together and think about these things. Otherwise, we are at risk. Our football is at risk. Why those dominant nations are not dominant anymore? There's something to think about there. They have the culture, they have the history. But more and more, their players rely and their teams rely on the dual citizen born somewhere else, what everybody else has on the continent. And the culture of the game is not evolving locally anymore. And we have a risk. And we have to take care of that, and the rest will come. But we have to take care of that. We need to reroute our football in our communities, in the people's mind. This has to become what they do. It doesn't have to be high quality, but it has to be emotionally connected to their identities. For the AFCON stadium, yes, they are not full. It's also a big sign that people just don't love football for the sake of football. They love football because they are connected to something. And if my country is not playing, I don't love football much. My patriotism is not at stake here. I'm not going to bother to go and sit in the stadium for 2-3 hours. That's one of the realities. What means that the culture of people, the culture of football in our societies is not the highest. What is not a big problem. But for the AFCON, the biggest challenge for stadium not being full, it is a logistical challenge for Africa. If Tanzania, how many Tanzanians can fly to Abidjan without bankrupting their family for months or years? How many? And that's where the challenge is. Europe is a small continent, and they have a strong communication network with trains. Then you are from Norway, you are going to play in Spain. If it takes a day or two, you can go to Spain by train, and it can be affordable for the average Europeans. But for us, what will take us to the playing field of AFCON is not affordable. We are the most expensive continent to travel through, and the longest long trip. This is not something sport can address, but it is a very strong factor. What makes stadium not full? What is itself for me is not a big deal. We may just start thinking about to create the ambience in the stadium, thinking about smaller stadium where we add seats eventually. We don't have to build this 20,000 seat stadium. We need maybe smaller stadium. Then when they are packed, yes, we don't make money out of more ticket, but we create the ambience that we are going to sell. That will look much better on TV. This is thing we have to think about. But we have to think through our challenges, and communication and transportation is a big factor of the fact that AFCON has had time to fill up the stadium. When the host country is playing, yes, but when the host country is not playing, it's more challenging.
Wow. Well, I think we have definitely delved deep into this CAF media rights saga, even down to the grassroots level, and just showing how interconnected and multi layered this issue is. It's absolutely fascinating. Brian, just to wrap up on your side, just what is your assessment of what Dr. Gerard has concluded on this issue and our topic today, the New World TV and CAF media rights, but also what it means for other layers within society and the sporting world?
I think, like I agree with Dr. Gerard, we have to keep thinking about the solutions and also to design perhaps competitions, taking into account the geography, the uniqueness of the continent, to address some of these challenges as accessibility mentions, traveling. I think we have Tanzania versus Morocco playing today. We don't know how many Tanzanians or Moroccans are going to make it to Ivory Coast. It's a challenge for the continent. So, how do we design a competition that makes it more accessible? Maybe a smaller competitions, stronger regional competitions with a smaller continent-wide one that is shorter and more accessible. I think there's a lot. There's a lot to do. There's a lot to think about, and media rights will continue to drive the business of sports. How we access, whether it's through mobile or pay TV. Internet penetration is still quite low in Africa. I think on average there's 30 something percent. That needs to improve the digital infrastructure for other things to make sense. So a lot of work to do for the continent. I think that's where we here, Africa Football Business Show, Africa Business of Sport podcast, are playing also a role in educating, creating awareness around these issues so that the decision makers and other stakeholders can start to come up with solutions towards a better sports ecosystem in Africa. Thank you, Jabu.
An amazing conversation we've had today. There it is, folks. Thank you for joining us for the second edition of our collaboration with the Africa Football Business Show here on the Africa Business of Sport podcast. Thank you, Brian, Dr. Akindes, Jabu, for this interesting conversation on everything sports broadcasting, particularly here in Africa, and how we can innovate moving forward. Do enjoy the games that come through today and for the subsequent days. I'm looking forward to Egypt facing Ghana tomorrow. Jabu, I'm sure you're looking forward to Bafana getting us hopefully 3 points in the second game. And Dr. Akindis, who are you supporting and hoping to win this AFCON?
I live in Cote d'Ivoire. I support Cote d'Ivoire. That is natural for me, and I support all the neighboring countries. Although Ghana is not doing well, support Senegal, Mali, Burkina. Is regional, if you can call it patriotism, is a cheap patriotism, but it's just a regional. But really, I would like to see a beautiful football. And one thing I want to mention before we close, it's we even has an address. CAF and the AFCON take on all our brain and time, but broadcasting rights in African football is a disaster. That is a whole other chapter we can discuss later. But I'm supporting football and I'm supporting my neighbors in West Africa. That's it.
Yes, that is it. We are supporting football and we are supporting our neighbors in West Africa and the continent as well. Join us next week, Wednesday, as we come with another guest, and myself, Brian and Jabu, we delve into the interesting topics here in sports business in Africa. From us, it is goodbye for now.